The space station called Verith, 9 floated between 3 star systems, belonging to none of them. It had been built over 200 years ago by 7 alien species who had decided, after a long and difficult history, that it was better to trade than to fight. The station was wide and round, like a coin spinning slowly in the dark. Lights blinked along its edges. Ships of every shape and size came and went at all hours. Dean Norris had been on the station before. He was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life, and his work often brought him to places far from Earth. But this was the first time he had brought his son with him. Cal Norris was 9 years old. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's habit of asking questions at the wrong moment. He stood at the viewport of their small guest room on Verith, 9, and pressed his nose against the glass, watching the stars. "Dad," he said, "are all those ships out there going somewhere important?" Dean looked up from his notebook. "Most things in the universe are going somewhere important, Bud." Cal seemed to think about that for a second, then nodded and went back to watching. The next morning, Dean took Cal to the museum. It was not a museum like the ones back home, with paintings in frames and dusty old bones behind glass. This museum was called the Wing of Preserved Histories, and it held things that most humans had never seen and never would, objects, tools, garments, and relics from species that no longer existed, or that had gone so far into the stars that they had not been heard from in centuries. Curator Ven met them at the entrance. Ven was a Vrethkai, which meant she was tall and thin with long arms, a small smooth head, and large dark eyes that blinked sideways. She moved the way long-legged creatures often do, slowly, carefully, like she was always aware of how much space she took up. "Dean Norris," she said, in the clipped and careful English she had spent years learning. "It is good that you have come. And this is your child." "This is Cal," Dean said. Cal looked up at Ven without flinching. "Your eyes go the wrong way," he said. Ven blinked sideways. "Yes. Many humans find that strange." "I think it looks cool," Cal said. Ven looked at Dean. Dean shrugged slightly. Ven made a sound that might have been a laugh. She led them deeper into the wing. The lights were low and warm. Display cases held things of impossible age. A fragment of a ship hull, a carved stone tablet covered in symbols, a piece of fabric woven from some material that no longer existed. Cal walked beside his father and looked at everything. Then they turned a corner, and Cal stopped. In the center of the room, hovering on a circular platform about 3 feet off the ground, was an egg. It was enormous. Cal was 9 years old and not a small child, and the egg was nearly as big as the couch back home. It was a deep, dark gray, not black, not silver, but something in between that seemed to shift when the light hit it from a different angle. It had no markings, no cracks. It was perfectly smooth. And it was cold. Cal could feel the cold from 5 feet away, a slow and heavy chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "What is that?" Cal asked quietly. Ven folded her long hands in front of her. "That," she said, "is the last known egg of the Dravath." Cal had not heard that word before. He looked up at his father. Dean's face had gone still in the way it did when he was trying to stay calm about something that was making his heart beat faster. "The Dravath," he said. "The dragon species." "They were not dragons," Ven said gently. "That is the human word for them. They were something older and more complicated than that. They were sapient, thinking, speaking, traveling beings. One of the oldest species ever recorded in this part of the galaxy." She paused. "They have been gone for 400 years. This egg was found drifting in space, alone. It has been here ever since." Cal took 1 step closer. Then another. "Has anyone tried to hatch it?" he asked. "Every species that has attempted it has failed," Ven said. "Every method of warming it, every energy transfer, every biological process known to the Council. The egg does not respond. It has been cold since the day it was found." Cal stood very close to it now. He reached one hand out slowly. "Cal," Dean said. But Cal had already placed both of his small hands flat against the surface of the egg. It was very cold. Colder than he expected. Like touching the outside of a window in deep winter. He stood there for a long moment. "It doesn't feel dead, Dad," he said quietly. "It feels lonely." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And somewhere deep inside the shell of the egg, somewhere far too small for any instrument in the room to catch. Something shifted, just barely, like a breath taken after a very long sleep. The alert came at 6 in the morning. It was not a loud alarm. It was a soft chime, the kind the station used for low-level readings, the sort of thing that might mean a pressure shift in one of the outer corridors or a minor sensor fault in the cargo wing. The kind of alert that usually turned out to be nothing. But Ven was awake before the chime finished, and she was in the artifact wing within 10 minutes. The monitoring panel beside the Dravath egg was showing something it had never shown before. The surface temperature of the egg, which had read the same number for the full 87 years the station had been tracking it, had gone up by 0.3 degrees. Ven stood in front of the panel for a long time. She checked the sensors. She checked them again. She pulled up the last 12 hours of readings and compared them to the 12 hours before that, and the 12 hours before that, going back 2 decades. Nothing. 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 And then, starting from the time the human child had pressed his hands against the shell, a slow and steady rise. She contacted Dean Norris at 6:40. He arrived with Cal still half asleep beside him, the boy wearing a jacket over his pajamas and rubbing his eyes. Within the hour, Dr. Lena Foss was there as well, a human xenobiologist who had been stationed on Verith 9 for 3 years, doing research on biological preservation methods. She was shorter than Dean, with red hair pulled back and a habit of writing notes directly on her palm when she did not have paper. She ran her scanner over the egg twice, 3 times, 4 times. "This is coming from the inside," she said, not loudly. More like she was saying it to herself. Not the environment. Not the platform. The inside. "That is what my sensors also show," Ven said. Lena wrote something on her palm. Ambassador Torx arrived before anyone had called him. He was a member of the Galactic Oversight Council, the body responsible for, among other things, managing disputes between species and overseeing culturally significant artifacts like the Dravath egg. He was large, wide-shouldered, with gray skin the texture of old bark. He moved into the room the way important people often do, as if the room had been waiting for him. He looked at the egg. He looked at the panel. He looked at Dean and Lena with an expression that was not quite unfriendly but was definitely not warm. "You are the father of the human child," he said to Dean. "I am," Dean said. "And the child touched the artifact." "He did. I tried to stop him." Torx made a sound low in his chest. "I have been a council member for 41 years, he said. "In that time, 11 separate attempts have been made to stimulate response in this egg. 3 were carried out by species with biological capabilities your kind has not even theorized yet. None produced any result." He looked at the panel. "A human child places his hands on it, and we are now here discussing a 0.3 degree temperature reading." "It's now 0.4, Lena said, looking at her scanner. Silence. "It went up while we were standing here," she added. More quietly, "Actually, it went up since we brought Cal into the room." Every head turned toward Cal. Cal had been standing slightly behind his father, looking at the egg the way he had looked at it the day before, with that quiet, steady attention that made him seem older than 9. He noticed them all looking at him and blinked. "What did you do?" Ven asked him. She had crouched down, folding her long legs so that she was closer to his height. Her sideways blinking eyes were fixed on his face. Cal thought about it. "I hugged it," he said. The room was very still. "You hugged it," Torx repeated. "Yeah. It seemed like it needed one." Cal looked at the egg. "It still does, kind of." Lena raised her scanner very slowly and aimed it at the egg again. She watched the number on the screen. She watched it for 10 seconds. 20. Then she showed the screen to Dean without saying anything. The temperature had gone up another full degree since Cal had started speaking. Dean stared at the number. Then he looked at his son, who was looking at the egg with that same calm and simple expression, like the answer to everything was obvious and he did not understand why everyone else was making it so complicated. "Lena," Dean said carefully, "is it possible that what we are seeing is connected to—" "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what this is." She paused. "But it's real. It is absolutely and completely real." Torx said nothing. He stood with his thick arms folded across his chest, staring at the egg. His expression had changed in some way that was hard to name, not convinced, not pleased, but something else. Something that was working its way slowly toward uncertainty. And the egg, for the first time in 87 years, was warm. Petra Cole had been studying the Dravath for 6 years. She was 28, worked in the station archives, and had what her colleagues politely called an obsession. Her workspace was covered in printed fragments of translated Dravath texts, most of them incomplete, many of them contradictory. She had filed 17 formal requests to access restricted Dravath materials held by the Council. 14 had been denied. When Dean Norris knocked on her archive door at just past 9 in the morning and said he needed everything she had on Dravath incubation, she did not ask why. She just turned around and started pulling files. By midnight, she and Lena and Dean had spread the contents of 4 research boxes across a long table in one of the station's private conference rooms. Cal was asleep on a chair in the corner, his jacket folded under his head. Someone had put a second jacket over him and he had not woken up. Most of what we know about Dravath reproduction comes from second-hand accounts, Petra said. She spoke quickly, the way people do when they have been thinking about something for so long that the words have trouble keeping up. The Vrethkai wrote about them. A few other species left records. But the Dravath themselves did not record things the way other species did. They did not build libraries. They passed knowledge in a way that we do not fully understand. Oral tradition? Dean asked. More than that. Something more direct. Petra pulled a folder from the pile and opened it. There are fragments, very old, very incomplete, that describe the Dravath as empathic. Not telepathic. Not mind-reading. But deeply, biologically sensitive to the emotional states of those around them. Even before they were born. Lena looked up from her notes. The eggs, Petra continued, according to these fragments, did not develop through heat the way most biological eggs do. The warmth that a Dravath egg needed was not a temperature. It was something the old texts describe as unguarded warmth. She put the folder down. A feeling. Offered without purpose. Without a goal behind it. The room was quiet. Every species that tried to hatch this egg, Dean said slowly, used technology. Or ritual. Or some kind of formal process. Yes, Petra said. All of which have intent. All of which have a goal. You use a warming device because you want the egg to hatch. You perform a ceremony because you want something to happen. The Dravath, according to this, she tapped the folder, could sense the difference between something done with a purpose and something done simply because it felt right. Lena sat back in her chair. Cal had no purpose, she said. He just thought it looked lonely. Yes, Petra said. There was a soft chime from Lena's scanner on the table. She checked it. The egg's temperature had gone up again, a full degree since they had left the artifact wing hours ago. A slow, quiet, steady rise. Ambassador Torx had asked to be included in any research meetings, and he was sitting at the far end of the table. He had not spoken in some time. He was looking at the printed fragment in front of him with an expression that was difficult to read. Elder Verith is connected, Ven said from the doorway. She had arranged a holographic link to one of the oldest living Vrethkai scholars, a being who had spent 60 years studying what little remained of Dravath history. The hologram appeared above the center of the table. Elder Verith was very old. His arms were thin, his movements slow, but his eyes were sharp and clear and fixed on the documents spread across the table in front of the others. Petra explained what they had found. Verith listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I have believed this for 40 years, he said finally. His voice was low and careful. "I wrote about it twice. Both times the council told me I was applying emotional reasoning to a biological question." He looked at Torx. Torx did not respond. "The Dravath were not like other species," Verith continued. "They did not separate feeling from thinking. For them, these were the same thing. The egg does not need warmth from a machine. It needs to feel that the world outside is safe. That someone out there is glad it exists." He paused. "Not because they want something from it. Just because." The room was very quiet. Petra reached across the table and pulled out a single page, one of the few surviving Dravath philosophical texts, translated 3 centuries ago and rarely referenced since. She found the line she had marked earlier and read it aloud. The last thing a Dravath child learns in the shell is the feeling of being welcomed. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Cal stirred in his chair in the corner. He did not wake up. He just shifted slightly and pulled the jacket a little closer around himself. Torx, at the end of the table, looked at the sleeping child for a long moment. Then he looked down at the page in front of him. He did not say anything. But something in his face had changed. A small, slow change, the kind that happens when a person has been certain about something for a very long time and is only now, quietly and privately, beginning to wonder. By the second day, word had spread through the station. Nobody had announced anything. Nobody had sent a message. But on a space station, news moves through corridors the way water moves through cracks, quietly, steadily, and it gets everywhere. People had seen the readings. Someone in the monitoring room had mentioned it to a colleague. That colleague had mentioned it to someone else. By morning, there were 20 beings standing at the observation window of the artifact wing, looking in at the egg. By afternoon, there were 60. They were every species the station housed: Vrethkai, Tereshi, Colvin, Myron, a family of 4-armed beings called the Osaveth that Cal had never seen before and stared at with great interest. They stood at the window in small groups and they watched the egg. The egg did not look different. Not yet. But the temperature readings were being displayed on a panel visible through the glass, and everyone could see the numbers, and everyone knew what those numbers meant. The Galactic Oversight Council convened an emergency session that evening. It was held in a large circular room near the center of the station, and it was attended, in person or by hologram, by representatives of 19 species. There were 3 proposals on the table. The first was to quarantine the egg and place it under full scientific study, sealed off, no visitors, all interactions logged and controlled. The second was to relocate it to a more secure facility. The third was to continue as things were and simply observe. The debate was long. Several representatives argued that the egg was a cultural artifact of enormous importance and that an uncontrolled situation involving a child and an unknown biological process was not appropriate. One speaker used the phrase unprecedented liability. Another used the phrase potential catalyst event, which made people nervous in different ways. Then Torx stood up. He did not speak right away. He stood at his place at the council table and looked around the room, and the room went quiet the way it does when someone who does not usually speak is about to say something. "I have sat on this council for 41 years, he said. "In that time we have made many careful decisions about many sensitive things. We have followed procedures. We have respected protocols. We have moved slowly and deliberately because slow and deliberate is usually right." He paused. "The Dravath disappeared 400 years ago. We do not know exactly why. There are theories. There are records. But one thing the records suggest consistently is that the Dravath withdrew from the galaxy because they no longer felt that the galaxy understood them. The room was very still. They were empathic beings. And we, all of us, responded to them with technology, with politics, with carefully planned gestures of goodwill that had goals behind them." He looked down at the table. "We did not know how to simply be warm. And they knew the difference." He looked up. Now a human child, who did not know what the egg was, who had no goal, who simply thought it seemed lonely, has done in one moment what 41 years of council-approved attempts could not do. And our first instinct is to put a wall around it. Nobody spoke. "I am voting against quarantine," he said, and sat down. The vote, when it came, was 14-5 against quarantine. Against relocation. In favor of continuing as things were. Cal was allowed to visit the artifact wing each day. No one required him to touch the egg or perform any action. He simply came and sat near it, sometimes on a small stool that Ven had brought in for him. Sometimes he talked to it. Sometimes he just sat quietly and drew pictures in a small notebook he carried with him. Lena monitored everything obsessively, filling data file after data file. Dean watched his son and said very little. There was something happening that was larger than anything he had words for. On the 4th evening, during Cal's visit, something changed. Cal was sitting on his stool, telling the egg about his dog back home, a brown and white dog named Walter who was afraid of thunderstorms and liked to sleep under beds. He was describing the way Walter made a particular sound when he wanted to be fed, a long, low moan that started quietly and built until someone got up. He was in the middle of this description when the surface of the egg moved. Not cracked. Not broke. It simply shifted, a slow, rolling motion, like something turning over in a deep and heavy sleep. A movement from inside. Cal went very still. Then he smiled. Slowly, quietly, the way people smile when something they have been hoping for finally happens. "Hi," he said softly to the egg. Every sensor on the station triggered at once. The screens in the monitoring room lit up with data. Lena dropped her scanner and then picked it up again immediately. Dean stood up from his chair without thinking. In his hologram connection from the archive room, Elder Verith pressed both of his thin hands over his face and held them there. And at the observation window, 60 beings from 19 different species stood very still and watched. The hatching did not happen all at once. It took 4 hours. And it did not look the way anyone had expected. Not the violent cracking and bursting that some species associated with hatching, not the dramatic moment of shell shattering outward. The surface of the Dravath egg seemed to soften, slowly, from the outside in. The dark gray shell grew lighter in color. Faint lines appeared on its surface, not cracks but something more like seams, as if the shell had always been made of pieces and had simply been waiting for the right time to let them separate. The temperature in the artifact wing rose steadily, not uncomfortably, but enough that everyone in the room could feel it. People were very quiet. Even the children among the station's visitors, and there were a few, pressed against the observation window, were quiet. There was something in the air that made quiet feel correct. Like being inside something important. Cal sat on his stool, 3 feet from the egg. His father sat behind him. Lena stood to one side, scanner in hand, recording everything. Ven stood near the doorway. Torx stood at the back of the room with his arms at his sides, which was unusual for him. Elder Verith watched through his hologram connection, still and silent. At the start of the 4th hour, the last of the shell fell away. It did not fall loudly. The pieces drifted down to the platform's surface slowly, lightly, like something that had been held together by a feeling rather than by structure. They landed without a sound. And what was inside was not what most of them had imagined. They had all, in their own ways, been picturing something large. The adult Dravath described in historical records were enormous, the size of small buildings, capable of interstellar travel under their own power. Whatever came from an egg that size should have been considerable. What came from the egg was roughly the size of a large dog. It stood on 4 legs on the platform, slightly unsteady, its scales a deep and shifting blue that moved between dark navy and a softer color at the edges, like the sky just before dawn. Its wings were folded flat against its sides. Its neck was long and curved. Its face was narrow, and its eyes were the color of deep space, a dark that was almost not a color at all, and they were completely, unmistakably, powerfully aware. It looked at the room. The room looked back. A sound moved through the observers at the window, through Lena and Dean and Ven, a collective breath held and released, not quite a gasp, something softer. Something that did not have a name. The creature turned its head slowly, taking in the space, the people, the lights, the air. It moved with the careful deliberateness of something that has been waiting a long time and is not going to rush the experience of arriving. Then it looked at Cal. Cal had not moved from his stool. He was looking back at the creature with the same expression he had worn since the very first day, that open, uncomplicated attention, like there was nothing about this moment that needed to be anything other than what it was. The creature stepped down from the platform. Its legs were still not fully steady. It walked slowly across the short distance between the platform and Cal's stool. And then it pressed its head against Cal's chest. Cal put his arms around it. He did not hesitate. He did not look to his father for permission or to Lena for guidance. He just hugged it, the way he had hugged the egg on the first day without thinking about it, because it seemed like the right thing to do. The creature's scales shifted color. The blue deepened toward something warmer. Its eyes closed partway. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Lena was crying. She had not decided to cry. It had simply happened, and she was not making any effort to stop it. She kept her scanner aimed at the creature, because she was a scientist and her instinct was to keep recording, but her other hand was pressed against her mouth. Torx, at the back of the room, did something that none of his aides had ever seen him do. He bowed. A slow, deliberate bow of his wide head, a gesture that in his species' tradition was reserved for moments of deep and genuine respect. His aides looked at each other, uncertain, and then, one by one, they bowed as well. Elder Verith, in his hologram, simply watched. His expression was not grief and not happiness, but something that held both of them at once, the way very old people sometimes look when they have waited a long time for something and are finally watching it arrive. Dean knelt beside his son. "You okay, bud?" he asked. Cal looked up. His expression was calm and easy. "Can we keep it?" he asked. The tension in the room came apart. Laughter moved through the space in 6 different languages, low and surprised and genuine, the kind of laughter that comes when something moves you so much that the only way out of it is through a smile. The Council's formal records, filed 3 days later, describe the event in careful and precise scientific language. The first confirmed hatching of a Dravath egg in recorded history, occurring on Verith 9 station, in the presence of multiple witnesses from 19 species. The record listed the factors believed to be responsible. It cited the research of Dr. Lena Foss and Dr. Dean Norris, the archive work of Petra Cole, and the scholarship of Elder Verith. And in the final line of the record, in the same formal and careful language as everything else, the name of the primary catalyst was listed. Cal Norris, age 9, Earth. That evening, after most of the observers had gone and the artifact wing had grown quiet, Cal sat with a young Dravath at the wide viewport that looked out toward open space. The creature was warm against his side. Its scales had settled into a calm and steady color, the soft blue of early morning. Cal talked quietly. He told it about Earth, about the way grass felt under bare feet, about the smell of rain on hot pavement, about the sound a city makes at night when most people are asleep. He told it about Walter the dog, and about the school he went to, and about the tree in his backyard that he had tried to climb once and fallen out of, which had made his mother very upset. The Dravath listened to every word. Its large dark eyes were open and fixed on him, and though it did not speak, something in the quality of its stillness made it clear that it was not simply hearing sounds. It was taking everything in. Outside the viewport, the stars were very far away, and very many. Somewhere among them, the systems that had once been home to the Dravath were still out there. Old light, old worlds, old histories waiting to be found again. For the first time in 400 years, someone was on their way back to them. And the first thing that someone had learned, before it had taken a single step into the galaxy, was the same thing a human child had offered it without thinking, that somewhere out there, a hand was warm, and a heart was open, and the feeling of being welcomed was real.